Good morning, good afternoon, depends on where you are in the United States. You could be, Pacific time zone. You're still kind of finishing up your morning here, East Coast. You're getting into your afternoon. You could be in Central here, where I hope you're grabbing lunch and having lunch with us here today. Grab a water, grab a coffee, settle in. We'll give everyone a few moments to join before we get started here. The webinar today that you are joining, welcome, is focused on profitability. And this is a second in a series of 3 webinars talking about how to grow your law firm and think about profitability as a strategy as you continue to grow and evolve your law firm. So the last webinar we did, which we can give you access to, if you'd like to see the recording on that, talked a little bit about what profitability means in the context of building a law firm, and how you think about the puts and takes in that calculation. So how do you think about reducing costs, which is always important when you think about profitability, but maybe what's more important than reducing costs is also how you think. So our last webinar on profitability was really focused on how you think about the different possibilities in your business to increase your revenue streams. And that's really where you start to get to the good stuff. So we're back here today with Debbie Foster from Affinity Consulting. She is the president, CEO, founder, superwoman of all things at Affinity Consulting. She's been doing this a lot longer than experience in market. Working with firms in the mid-market of all sizes, kind of from solo firms all the way up to much larger firms that are, approaching AmLaw 200. And Debbie has some really great experience thinking about how firms do profitability planning, how firms do succession planning and growth planning, and how they think about leaving a legacy for the future. And so we're really excited to host Debbie here on our Centerbase webinar to continue our conversation about profitability. Then, of course, my name is Paige Roncke. I am your MC today and your host for this webinar. I am the Chief Revenue Officer at Centerbase, and I am here to help law firms understand how to create infrastructure from a technology perspective so that they can think about growth. I mean, as a revenue officer here at Centerbase, what I think about is how our business can grow and how we can maximize our different profit streams, our revenue streams, and how those contribute to our overall profit profile within our business. And I think very deeply about profit and loss and cost and puts and takes. So I'm really excited to learn from Debbie about how that intersects with a law firm's universe and how firms build their business today. So I'm going to let Debbie talk a little bit and introduce herself, and then we're going to jump in here in just a couple minutes.
Awesome. So thank you, Paige. As Paige, Affinity Consulting, and most of my client work centers around strategy and planning and helping firms think about how to get from where they are to where they want to go. And that includes things like strategic planning and succession planning and developing a growth strategy and thinking differently about how work gets done, thinking differently about what their technology stack should look like to be able to support them in working as efficiently as possible. And this topic of profitability is very near and dear to my heart, because oftentimes profitability in a law firm is measured just by what money is left. Like, how did we do this year is revenue minus expenses. And it's so much more than that. And so I love the conversation that we had in the first episode of this series, where we talked about the leaky bucket. We're all walking around with a bucket full of water and there's lots of holes in it. And there's lots of ways to think about how we plug those holes. And so today I'm excited to be talking about benchmarking and equity partnership and compensation, and kind of the next part of the conversation that we started a few weeks ago.
That's great. And those are the 3 topics we're going to dive into today in that order. So we're going to talk about benchmarking, we'll go into shareholder equity, and then we'll talk a bit about compensation. So let's start there. Debbie, first question to you. Folks in law firms talk a lot about benchmarking. It's obviously an integral part of how you set rates and think about revenue that you're bringing in. Why don't we start with the basics? What is benchmarking and why is it relevant for law firms when setting rates?
So I think that benchmarking can really encapsulate lots of different parts of the profitability equation. And I get asked that question all the time. Like, can you tell me what other firms are doing? So what is benchmarking? Can you tell me what other firms are doing? That's benchmarking, right? That's how we think about what is our firm doing as it relates to how other firms are doing. And so it can be about rates. It can be about ratios, like how many lawyers to how many legal assistants or paralegals do you have? It can be about profits per partner. That's a widely published statistic. So there's lots of different things that benchmarking can mean for a law firm. My take on benchmarking, though, because I don't always have the industry standard take, my take on benchmarking is it's great as long as you understand that there are caveats to every benchmark, right? Like when I'm not going to name the results of a survey. That is a widely published survey in our industry. And I was reading some statistics and they were really surprising to me. And that made me flip back to like the first 6 pages to understand how many law firms actually answered this question. And my perception of the benchmarking data that I was reading about was that thousands of law firms would have answered this question. But it was like 420 law firms, which suddenly made me go, I'm not actually sure that was the benchmarking I was looking for, right? How do you define benchmarking? So some of the challenges that come along with that is understanding who was the audience, whatever data you're looking at when it comes to benchmarking, who is the audience, do they do the same kind of work that you do? So in your example page of rates, it doesn't take very many insurance defense firms to bring an average rate way down. So when I look at the benchmarking for hourly rates for attorneys in my area, I have to dig a little bit deeper than just understanding what the average hourly rate is. Is my work specialty work? How much experience does the lawyer have that's delivering that? So I'm going to stop there for just a second.
I was going to say,
I feel like you have some follow-up questions.
I do.
I don't want to make my final points about benchmarking too early.
I do, and I'm taking notes here as we go because I do think it's really important to kind of capture what you're saying. And so I'm going to repeat back kind of like the 4 important things to note when you're benchmarking from what I heard. Who is the audience that you're benchmarking against? So of the survey that you're taking or you're looking at, who was included in that survey? How many firms? You just want to be really careful about knowing what you're looking at and who participated in that. The second is practice area. So you very aptly pointed out that, one insurance defense firm or personal injury firm may completely change the rates versus if you're looking at corporate litigation. It will obviously be very different rates depending on the end client of those firms. And so you want to be 2. Number 3 I heard was, is there any specialty work going on? And there are some nuances, of course, when you practice where you might have a very, intensive, specialized defamation case, as an example, where you need to bring in quite a few specialists and you need to have a lot of specific talent or tools at your disposal important in benchmarking. And the 4th piece, which ties into that really closely, is experience. So does this work, or do these rates require a specific level of experience that would be expected? I mean, is it corporate bankruptcy, or are we talking about, personal bankruptcy? Those are 2 very different types of practice, and it will change the rate. But it sounds like from we can distill it down to those 4 areas, but taking a step back, just based on your answer, I think what I heard from you is that it's a little bit tricky when you start looking at all of these different areas and you're trying to parse out the information. What are kind of the common pitfalls when you step into this? Is there something, should you be benchmarking? Is it a dangerous practice?
So I think gathering data is really important. When we're making strategic business decisions, we do not want to do them as the wind blows, right? We want to have some data. So I think it can be part of the story. It can be part of the information that you're gathering together. But I'm always cautioning people about putting too much weight in benchmarking data. And, I think that there are, I'm sure, some cases where I might look at some benchmarking data. Like, for example, I recently looked at a salary survey. I had a client who was looking to hire a COO, and I looked at some amazing salary data from the ALA, who we both are big supporters of the ALA. They have a compensation survey, and I bought their compensation survey, and I was able to look at that, and it was very specific. So the job of the COO was clearly defined. There were lots of other roles. It was specific to the geographic area. It was specific to the practice size. And it was a piece of information that I gathered for the client to go and say, look, like, this is the mid-range. This doesn't mean this is exactly how much we should pay this person, but this can serve as a gut check for when you start to interview for this position and we talk about salary requirements. If our gut check is here and someone comes to us and says, I actually just am looking for about $43,000 a year, we probably don't want to hire that person. But if they say, I'd like to make $1 million a year, you know what that gut check range was. And you can stop and be like, this is interesting. This doesn't seem like it tracks. So I think it's a piece of data, for sure. But it shouldn't be everything that we build our next decision on. It should just be a piece of information that we gather.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I like that you're also applying benchmarking as a concept, not only to rates that you might set with your clients, but also to how you set compensation within your firm for employees. And, the example you provided, $43,000 a year versus $1 million a year. In that example, of course, benchmarking, it makes sense. It's obvious those are two very different ends of the spectrum. But as you get into those nuanced discussions where you're talking about $80,000 a year versus $95,000 a year, it is important, I think, to start with a data point, even if it's a benchmark, and then create your own analysis around it. So as you apply some of those other things that we just talked about for benchmarking your rates, those are also true for benchmarking salaries within your firm. How much experience is this role? Do we need? How easy is it to backfill this role or replace this person based on their expertise, their specialty, their experience, the practice area that you're practicing? Like, how specialized is this role? And that will also tell you the value that you would put on this role for your particular practice area. What is the potential for this role in terms of revenue generated for the firm? And it will give you a better sense of, say the benchmark is, and I was using 80 to 95 as a range, say the benchmark is 85,000, but it's a more special area and you're bringing a specific person with a specific book of business, you might want to skew north of that in terms of a salary range. But it's important before you look for this person and as you set these roles within your firm to create your range and your policy around it. Because that's where I think the gut check is so important. You can run wild and just start paying people to, $300,000, $400,000 a year, and then you're setting strange expectations within your firm as well. I know I'm kind of jumping ahead to salary, but you're setting strange expectations within your firm on what an individual may be paid versus someone else, and people talk. And it's the same thing with rates. Right? It's the same thing with rates to your clients. You can start to get ahead of yourself and increase rates for one client or another, and they may talk to each other and get back to your book of business. So all of that to say, benchmarking can be very useful to set your own internal policies. And that's kind of how I think about it when I practice, but also as we set benchmarks for ourselves within Centerbase for hiring folks. Set your own policy and have a point of view on what that rate should be and why. And benchmarking can be a piece of data to inform that. But I really want to echo what you said here, is that it can be misleading if you don't balance it out with other pieces of information and context within your market.
Yeah, and every one of you has benchmarking data from your own firm. Like, you can be your own benchmark. And Paige, you've heard me say this before, transformation begins from exactly where the law firm that I'm working with is right now, right? If you want to do something different, it's really just about what is the next right step. And the next right step when it comes to data and benchmarking, let's say we're talking about rates. I would say to a firm, why don't you, before we start looking at what your neighbors are billing, and then try to figure out what goes into all of those numbers, because what their hourly rate is isn't necessarily what they're collecting. We know that, and we don't always, that those lines aren't always connected. So before we get into what is your neighbor billing hourly, why don't you tell me the 5-year history of your billing rates? Like, let's take 5 lawyers at different stages in their careers that have worked here for the last 5 years. Tell me what their rates were in 2000 and 2021 and 22, 23, and 24. Let's look at that benchmark. How have we raised our rates? What kind of pushback did we get? What did our clients say about that? Maybe we do happen to know what the people down the road are billing, but if you look at your own benchmarking data and you see that your current billable rate is $775 an hour, and 5 years ago it was $700 an hour, and your neighbor's billing $1,100 an hour, you're not moving from $775 to $1,100, right? Like, so what's the next right step for you? And then the second thing that I would say, because all of these things are connected, is talking about, and especially if we stick on the topic of billable rates, you said value. And value is like, what is it worth?
Yeah.
What is it worth for you? I mean, my joke to our clients all the time when we talk about, living and dying by the point 2 is, I'm like, let me just make sure I lay it all the way out for you. If you were busy working on something and something happened, your phone dinged, an email came into your inbox, your phone rang, like whatever it is, you stop what you're doing. You have a conversation with a client, you exchange some pleasantries, they ask you a question, you solve their problem. You hang up, maybe you do the time entry for that, and maybe you don't, because we know that is the reality. Maybe you will and maybe you won't, but let's just say for the purpose of this argument that you did the time entry. So you're going to go to your billing program, you're going to click on new, you're going to find the client, you're going to type in your description, and you're going to put in a point 2 for that. And then you're going to click OK. And then you're going to go check your email, see if anything new has come in. Then you're going to go be distracted by ESPN.com or Facebook or Instagram or whatever. And then you're going to go back to what you were working on when the phone rang. And you have likely lost 30 minutes just in that one distraction. So when I think about value of getting on a call with a client, I try to disconnect myself from how long I was on with the client, right? Like, how do we think about as we reimagine pricing, which every law firm is going to be challenged. If you are not already challenged to reimagine pricing, you are going to be challenged to reimagine pricing. Benchmarking data on reimagining pricing and flat rates and value pricing and those kinds of things are going to be very challenging to compare apples to apples. Billable rates are less challenging, but they're still riddled with all kinds of comparative challenges. So I would just say that you have your own benchmarking data. If you think about the story of your firm, where is there friction? Where are you losing efficiency in how you get your work done? How are you thinking about where you are now and where you want to go? Your very own benchmarking and thinking about that concept of 1% better, continuous improvement, that could be your most valuable benchmarking. It's just understanding where you are, a little bit around how you got there, and then what is next for you.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think there's a couple things there I want to pull out. One is that you may have a journey ahead of you. Maybe you haven't thought about increasing your rates in some time, or you've been hesitant to do that for whatever contextual reason may exist. As you start on that journey, as you may start to continue to increase your rates or think about what that would look like over the next 5 years, just keep in mind it is a journey. And the firm next door to yours or the person you had drinks with last night might have been on that journey for some years, and that's why they could possibly be ahead of you on this. So just keep that in mind. I love your point on that. Start where you are and incrementally improve from there. I think the second thing that's really important that I want to pull out of that dialogue was start with your own data. And you have so much information. That example of billing that 0.2 and understanding, that phone call to that customer. Think about within your technology systems, you pull out a report for that attorney, for that client, and you can see over the course of the last 6 months or 1 month even, here's how many different tasks I billed that client for how many different matters. And you can see in that data trends and analysis that will help you put together a better rate table. For example, this client prefers to communicate with me over the phone, which means that I'm going to be frequently interrupted. And it means that it's more difficult for me to appropriately schedule my time and set time aside for this client. If that's the case, and I'm working multiple matters with this client, I'm just kind of making up a scenario here, working multiple matters, communicate with the phone, possibly erratically. Never heard of anyone who does that. That means that I might want to consider a different billing model for this client. And my data is telling me that, which means I might want to look at it and say, on average, over the last 9 months, I have billed X amount of hours for these activities. I think I'm losing 20% of my build time because of the nature of these build events. First off, you should have automatic time capture, which is a product that I sell. And this is not a sales call, but it will automatically capture that phone call. But there are times when you're not going to capture time. So you want to think about putting that customer on a flat rate because you're going to bill a certain amount of time for a certain number of matters over the course of months. You have all of that data in your software system already, and you can pull that in a report and do an analysis. There's a couple of things here which I would encourage you to do. One, if your software can't do that, you should think about the infrastructure you need because this is where the industry is trending. You have to start thinking about creative billing practices as we get into AI, as we start talking about what billable time is and what a billable practice would look like. That's number one. I don't want to explode everyone's heads right now, but starting with data and having an infrastructure to capture that data is really important. And then the second thing is having a partner you can work with. And I know Debbie does this all the time, but think about your firm infrastructure. Do you have a team that can look at these trends in your data and understand what your rate and your billing practices should look like, or your compensation practices? Because I will tell you, as you think about succession planning, and we're going to talk about that a little bit here next, and shareholder equity, you have to have at least a core group, a committee or a consultant that can help you work through some of these changes and investment decisions that you have to make as a firm as you think about your long-term growth cycle and kind of the legacy that you're leaving behind as your firm starts to turn that corner. I just said a lot there. I don't want to, again, jump too many topics, but the point is you have the data in front of you. If you don't, you should get it. And if you do, you should think about how you use it to your advantage as you set rates and think about compensation.
Yeah, I was talking to a client. We were doing some strategic planning for a client, and they were talking about, the 33-page report, the 33 reports, monthly report package that they get, and how they don't use all those. They look at page 7 and only page 7.
Right.
And we were talking about what happens when you start to use data. It's not always easy to just make that jump because for some people, they don't really even understand what's in the report package. They understand the 3 numbers they need to understand. But when you start using your data, you start asking questions about your data. And then you start to build more confidence in your data. And then you start to think about what else might be possible. But it all starts with using it. If we just dream of all the data we wish we had and we aren't ever using it, we're just asking lots of people to do extra work for no good reason.
Right.
So you start to use something, and I encourage people to start with 5 numbers. You cannot have 6, and you should not have 4. Pick 5 things that matter, just 5 things, and make sure you understand what they mean. And that could be around how many hours I billed this month, and it could be around what my collections were. It could be how many new matters did I open, how many new clients, how many lunches did I have with prospective clients. There's a million different KPIs that you can use. But when you start to use those, you're going to start to ask questions about the data. And then when you start to ask the questions, wait, why does that only say I had 3 lunches? Because I know that I had 5. Well, because we didn't enter the data consistently into the system. We need to enter our data consistently into the system, because the data should help us make better business decisions. It's not just there to look pretty in a chart or a spreadsheet or a PDF of a report that you get. So use your data, then you're going to start asking questions about your data. Then you're going to be more confident in your data. Then you're going to have this path to imagining what else you could know about your own business.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I think it's an underutilized kind of skill set in a lot of firms, because it's just not something that you employ every day, especially if you're a managing partner. I mean, your number one job is to make sure you're bringing new clients into the firm, and you're making sure that the other attorneys within your firm are operating at a pace and efficiency level that is the expectation for the firm. That is a data exercise, which seems crazy, but it is. Absolutely. You have all of that at your fingertips. And it's an integral piece of setting a growth strategy for your firm, is understanding where you are and where you want to go. And I kind of want to turn our attention a little bit to how you set the growth strategy.
Yeah.
And where I kind of want to take this eventually, and we'll get there, is how you think about growth as a firm, maybe just beyond like adding attorneys, but how, when you get to a partnership level and sharing and building equity within your firm, where do you start, and how do you think about building a growth strategy like that?
Yeah. So for me, growth strategy starts with a conversation around expectations, right? So I think it is super important to identify, I know this rhymes and I don't really like that it rhymes, but the attorney journey, right? Like from the day that you bring in a law clerk, because those of you who are bringing in a law clerk are hoping that that law clerk is going to impress you and you're going to make them an offer to become an associate. How do we make sure that the expectations of our law clerks are very clear? And when they come on board with us as an associate, the expectations are very clear. Clear expectations lets you measure people. Again, it's more data. It lets you measure people against what your expectation looks like. And it's not just about hourly billing. It's about how clients are managed. It's about responsiveness. It's about mentoring and being mentored, and how you learn the craft of being a lawyer, right? There's a lot more to it. So we start with expectations, because the expectation about what it takes to be an associate is followed by the expectation about what it takes to become an income partner, a non-equity partner, whatever that looks like. Like, what if I am an associate and I have my eye on the prize of partnership, right? What does that look like? Well, the next step might be income partner or equity partner. And some of you might be thinking like, okay, what are my expectations there? What does it take? Maybe I have to have started to develop some clients, and I have a base of clients, and I'm running more matters. I'm taking responsibility for more matters. And I have my list of things that are expected of me as a non-equity partner. And when I get into that seat, I know the firm where I'm working as a non-equity partner, I have 2 choices from here. Number one, I can stay an equity partner forever. Some people call people like that the grinders. They're the ones, they don't really want to own part of a business. They're great at managing matters. They can develop some business, but they're really happy just doing the work and getting the work done. And that is, for some firms, a perfectly acceptable stopping point. But if you have your eye on that prize, you have to have clarity around what the expectations are to go from being a non-equity partner to an equity partner. That is the foundation of every firm's growth strategy, right? Growth strategy does not have to be about adding people. growth strategy for me is how do we grow? When I think about the pie is the profit. Sometimes I sit down with a firm and I say, what does a growth strategy mean to you? And someone will say, I'd like for us to go from 35 to 50 lawyers. And I want to like hit the Family Feud buzzer, like, wrong answer. That's not the right answer. What if you make less money having 50 lawyers than 35? Why would you want 15 more people that are going to be supported by 15 more people? Why would you want to add 30 people, make less money? Doesn't make sense. Not if you want to run the most efficient and the most profitable business, right? So we're thinking about getting to that execution of the growth strategy is having clarity around what we can expect from our associates, from our non-equity partners, and then maybe most importantly, what the transaction looks like between a non-equity partner and an equity partner, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important stepping stone right there, that most attorneys are not prepared for or don't know much about, because if you are not in the inner circle, so to speak,
right,
you don't have much exposure to the work that takes place as an equity partner, and you probably haven't had much exposure to a partnership agreement,
right,
an internal agreement, and a buy-in. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
How would you give advice to firms or attorneys in terms of how you prep transitionary step? Because, and there's something I want to underscore why I'm asking this question is, this is an opportunity for a law firm to increase the pie. If you properly prepare an attorney for this transition and you have a proper coaching path or expectation setting, as Debbie has mentioned, you can very quickly turn an equity partner role into a revenue generating role. You want it to happen faster, and you want it to be as big of an impact as possible to the firm. So how would you think about that, Debbie? Because it sounds like, as you're saying, set a growth strategy. It's not just adding more attorneys. It's more about progression. It's about progressing attorneys through their career and making sure the attorneys you have are contributing as much as they can.
Yeah, and so first of all, it starts with thinking about it more as a business transaction and not a promotion. So many firms, and we work with lots of these firms who I'm interviewing associates or non-equity partners, and they say things like, I don't really know what it takes. It's kind of a black box. I don't really understand what it takes. So clarity and expectations, super important part of it. But there are 8 or 9 factors that we typically use when we're talking to a firm about setting a criteria for an equity partner. And they're not just about money. There is certainly, are you building a book of business that exceeds this certain dollar amount, right? If I'm going to become an equity partner at a firm, I should be generating enough business to keep me and at least one other person busy. So you can do the math there on what that number needs to be, right? That's how we grow the pie. The law firm business model over the years has not changed a whole lot, while the professional services industry has changed drastically. We're interviewing new accountants right now. Every single one of them is like, you can be on the $5,000 a month plan, the $7,000 a month plan, or the $10,000 a month plan. Every single one of them. And I'm like, I need to call my lawyer and say, how do I get on the monthly plan, right? Like I want to normalize my expenses, right? So when we're thinking about how we put this growth strategy in place and we think about expectations, that idea of growing the pie, the idea of saying, in order to be an equity partner here, we need you to think innovatively, right? We need you to be willing to try new things. We need you to be, this is a good one, a culture warrior for our firm. We need you to not be talking about the decisions that were made that you don't like. We need you to be a supporter of the business. The firm comes first. There might be a production number. You, as an equity partner, we have agreed that we will bill a minimum of X number of hours. A lot of times that's more of just a security blanket to give people an opportunity to say, hey, we need you to up your game here because you're seated at this owner table, right? We're not just lawyers anymore, we're business owners. So how do you think about that transaction? So often someone gets moved into an equity partner because they got to their 7 years or their 9 years, or we don't want to lose them. If we don't make them an equity partner, we're going to lose them. And a lot of times the person they're worried about losing has no idea what gets them across that threshold to becoming an equity partner. And this is such an important part of the growth strategy, because if you have people who are coming to work every day and they know what is expected of them to move from associate to non-equity partner to equity partner, you lay the foundation for getting the work done. And remember, everybody knows this. Associates, non-equity partners, and equity partners. What higher rates, more experience, better specialties. You want people moving through those ranks. Like, there's something to be said about how we leverage non-equity partners and associates to do the right people doing the right work. But also, if we're training people as they come up through the ranks with those expectations to build books of business. And by the way, we actually have to train those people. And some of you might be thinking, no one had to train me, but I'm telling you right now, you have to train the new people. The new people need the coaching and the mentoring and the setting the example and the being invited to meetings. It's a new world out there. It's a new generation of people. Funny enough, I read this article yesterday about, it said, the people who are mad at the millennials are the ones who raise them. And I was like, oh, ouch. Yeah, I have 2 millennials. So I can, so the people who are mad at the millennials are the ones who raise them. Think about that for a second, right? Like, it's terrible that they got participation trophies, but we gave them to them. We signed them up for the things where they got them, right? So
that's the infrastructure.
And I also do, I'd like to be very clear. We have lots of millennials at Affinity. They're amazing. Like, I don't have the broad brushstroke, but I hear that a lot in law firms. And it's around, like, when I came up through the ranks, no one had to teach me how to do these things, how to be a great lawyer, how to be a rainmaker. We've got to invest time in our people.
Yeah, don't get in your own way. If it was difficult for you, have an open mind enough to change the situation and the context to make it better. Because there's a couple things I want to pull out of that I think are really important. Is one, setting those expectations with your employees on attorney, non-equity partner, equity partner, and the threshold, what's required to get there, is going to help you build your overall revenue structure. Because as those attorneys move up, you're going to be able to charge more. And the expectation you are setting on those attorneys is that they should be bringing in more business to the firm. So not only are they personally charging more and bringing more revenue in, but they are also bringing in additional clients. So if you think about it in terms of a race or just like a run, you just go for a run and maybe you're not sure how long you're going to run or where you're exactly going, and you're just kind of meandering and you're like making it up as you go. You may not run as quickly or get to your destination as fast because you don't have a path and you don't know how long it should take you to get there because you don't know where you're going. If you're running a specific race, you're running a marathon and there are specific checkpoints and you are tracking it with your Apple Watch, you know exactly what your pace of your mile is, you know where those checkpoints are, and you sit down with your coach or your team or the person you're running your race with and you're like, I'm going to run a 9-minute mile every mile, which means at this first milestone and checkpoint, it should be this time. And at this checkpoint, it should be this time. And if I want to beat that pace, I'm going to have to go a little bit faster. Imagine if you said that to your attorneys.
Right.
This is what it takes to become a non-equity partner. This is what it takes to become an equity partner. I don't care how long it takes you to get there. You can do it faster. You can do it slower. But I expect this much business and I expect these kinds of ideas on the table. The faster you can accelerate them through that process, the more money you're actually bringing into the firm. You shouldn't be afraid of it. Yeah. You should embrace it and set those expectations so that your employees are challenged. They know what are and what's expected, and they know how to get there faster.
I want to just say one last quick thing.
Yeah.
Other criteria, when we cross that threshold from being an associate to a non-equity partner, and especially from a non-equity partner to an equity partner, we know like that this has been proven over time. It is easier to get more business from an existing client than to go out and find a new client. So if you're in a general practice firm, are you doing everything that you can do for the clients who are coming in your front door? Or are you so siloed? Silos are so anti-growth strategy. So if you tell your associates, like, one of the factors for you getting to a non-equity partner is me seeing you engaging in cross-selling activities. And the same thing, like, you're going to be an equity partner here, you got to be a master cross-seller. That means you have to have a little bit less of the mine client, and it's the firm's client, right? And bring more people in and do more work for those clients. Some people are like 1 inch away from executing on their growth strategy. Some firms are, because it's really about setting the right expectations and cross-selling. Just those 2 things can be a multiplier for nearly every single firm.
Yep, and train your team to do that. If you have an attorney in your firm who does that really well, give that person a platform anywhere in your kitchen, to talk to other attorneys about how that works.
Yeah.
And that goes into the training piece of it. Is if you're running that marathon, you have a coach on how to get from a 20-minute mile to a 9-minute mile. You'll get there faster than if you were just like, go run, I guess, and figure it out. And it's really important to kind of create a culture around training and to create a culture around innovation and being open-minded. And I think there's a distinction. I'm about to go into a thorny patch.
Uh-oh. Bring it.
I think for some, attorneys who are ambitious and coming up through the ranks and are pushing to be equity partners, and they're just getting to non-equity partner now, and they may be more used to technology. In their personal lives, they may be used to implementing more creative solutions to, problem solving. They, could look around in the universe, lots of SaaS products. I'm used to paying monthly subscription fees. This is how the world works now because I'm used to it. And I've always done that since I got out of college or whatever it is, because they've always had Netflix. But how do you train maybe partners who have been with the firm for a long time, are equity partners, and maybe are no longer really billing the hours that they used to, and maybe are more resistant to change? How do you create that culture within your equity partnership group that can flow down from that group into the rest of your firm?
So this is one of my favorite books, is Radical Candor by Kim Scott. And, these are hard conversations to have. A lot of times I get a firm who comes to me and says, I want to talk about succession planning. We have a succession planning. We need to do some succession planning. But I am a firm believer that succession planning is meant for lawyers in their 50s, not lawyers in their late 60s and 70s. The late 60s and 70s lawyers, who are still incredibly competent in many cases and doing amazing work for a firm, putting succession planning in place doesn't solve getting what you need from those people. So whether it's training, whether it's thinking about technology differently, whether it is mentoring a younger lawyer, that all starts with radically candid conversations, right? It's not going to be an amendment to our partnership agreement that's going to fix what's happening over here. What fixes what happens over here is, it's 2024. What a legacy you have left. There are 5 things that are really important that we need from you. Can we make a commitment to work on one of them? Maybe it's technology is the first one you pick, and maybe it's mentoring. Like, you are our most experienced, seasoned intellectual property attorney, and the knowledge in your head, we have to figure out how to capture that for some of our younger people. Can we work on that one thing, right? Everyone who expects that those people know what we need from them and they just haven't done it yet is just going to keep expecting and getting nothing. But if we are willing to have those radically candid conversations, the practice of law is changing. The way legal services are delivered is changing. We need your help. These are the 5 areas where we think that you could be contributing and do needle moving work for us. Can we work on one of them? That is my suggestion, is start with one thing.
Yeah. I want to ask this question. It seems like a soft question, but I also feel like it's the hardest. Where do you start? This is a sensitive. A lot of the folks that need to be engaged in these candid conversations are folks that have their name on the door and they have built this firm and no one would be there without them. How do you engage the equity partners in the firm in these types of conversations? Where would you start? How would you do it?
So every single one of us has room for improvement. So when we do strategic planning, we often talk about what does the firm need differently from me, from each one of us, right? And so those conversations around what can I be doing in 2025 that is needle moving for the firm, in addition to the big job I have taking care of my clients, because everybody is busy. That's the reason why we don't advance the ball forward, is because we're all busy trying to make sure we know where the ball is. And so this idea of how do we imagine what our law firm needs that is different from each one of us at the table is a great place to start. But it doesn't prevent us, because sometimes in a lot of firms that we work with, that is a strategy that can kind of neutralize the hard conversation, because we're all going to commit to something. But your point about name on the door, this person didn't do what they did, we wouldn't be here. The people that have to talk to those people are the ones that were mentored by them, are the ones that were, got handed half of a book of business because that person is, on the backside of their career. But I think that it's why it's so important that, that is the last part of the attorney journey. I talked about that before, right? It's from like, what do we expect from law clerks and associates and our non-equity partners and our equity partners? The last piece of that is, what does the backside of that journey look like for your firm? At what level? Many firms have mandatory de-equitization, not necessarily retirement. Some have retirement where you move to an of-counsel role. But clearly defining the back half of a lawyer's journey and clearly defining, like, technology competency should be an expectation for every single lawyer, not just because it's important, but because it's an ethical obligation. We know that. We know technology competency exists. So if we have these clearly defined expectations, we can go in and do a self-review and say, how am I doing on technology competency? And the person who doesn't answer their own emails, pretty hard on a scale of 1 to 5 to give yourself more than a 2, that's an area for improvement. But those clear expectations can really help in those conversations. But at the end of the day, as business owners, because that's what this is about. It's about running your business. Sometimes you got to have hard conversations with the people who work at your business.
Yeah, I love how you approach that, thinking about this as a business, because very often, law firms are such an intimate place to work. You really go through trauma together. Let's be honest. I don't know how else to categorize that. And you're doing it with a very close-knit group of people who, you can't talk about these things outside of work in a lot of instances. And it creates this kind of community and connection that can feel very intimate and very personal. But at the end of the day, I do think it's really important for this next level of leadership to step in and recognize that you're running a business. Yeah. And what does the future of that business look like? And I think if you start from a strategic growth standpoint, you start from that standpoint and you say, what is our 5-year growth plan? Or what is our plan for the next 5 to 10 years as a firm? What's our point of view as business owners? And can we sit down and have that conversation? How do I contribute to that? And how do I detract from that? And kind of, it's almost like a more neutral starting ground. And then you get into the point of, building equity from each person and how they contribute to the firm. And you can talk through some of these topics that we talked about today, which is mentorship and training and setting clear expectations. And that gives you an avenue or a path to talk about succession planning in the end of that journey and what that looks like from a profit sharing perspective and a contribution perspective. So it gives you a little bit more neutral footing. You're business owners. This is a business. And this is where kind of brings it full circle to what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation is if you are rooted in data and you have an infrastructure that allows you to make data-driven decisions, even if it's just 5 data points that you start with and that you use, it helps remove some of the emotion behind these decisions, less subjective and more objective. You want to look at data trends. You want to look at contribution by attorney or by practice area over time. You want to look at things like build rates and, profit per practice area over time. And that will help you make better business decisions. And you'll see your cost profile. How many attorneys do we have in that practice area? And what are they contributing? And what are they bringing back into the business? I have those conversations all the time running a software company because it's a business and because I have a board I have to report out to, and I'm responsible for revenue and cost that goes into this company and a product that we sell to many law firms that they run their businesses on. And firms don't necessarily think that way, but you have to start making that transition as we look at billable rates and what rates would look like in the future. It's not just by hour. There's so much more that goes into that. That we've covered today. So we are nearing the end of our time. I know we have 10 minutes left. I want to give folks who are on the call a chance to ask questions. You can drop questions into the chat and we'll try to get to them. If you have any, feel free to ask. But I also want to kind of ask you, Debbie, as like getting back to this like final topic that we haven't truly covered yet, which is compensation. How do you, as you have these conversations and you set forward an attorney journey, how do you go back and set appropriate compensation levels for your attorneys who are not equity partners?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm going to just start with the concept that you should always be rewarding what you value. So whenever I have a conversation about compensation with a law firm, I put up one of those big white pieces of paper and I write at the top of it, what do we value? And we make a list of all the things that we value. We value happy clients. We value cross-selling. Like you can say, I value when someone has 1,800 billable hours, right? Like I value when people meet their expectations. I value when people long to understand what is expected of them and actually meet those targets, right? But usually there ends up being a list of 15 to 25 things that we value. And then I turn that back to them and say, how many of these things do we compensate people for? We compensate people on origination and production. Maybe they get some kind of a stipend for being a managing partner, something like that. We compensate our associates based on salary with an expectation attached to it of pick a number of hours. The vast majority of firms that I work with, the lawyers are not hitting their billable hour targets in the mid-market. They're not hitting them. They're getting bonuses anyway. So then it makes me question, like, why do you even have a target? If the target is 1,800 and everybody's at 1,500 and they get a bonus at 1,500, why is the target 1,800? Like, how do we, right? So it's really about back to the expectations. Is our expectation realistic? When someone says to me, our target is 1,800, I immediately pull out my phone. I don't know what this number is, and I do 1,800 divided by 45. So 1,800 divided by 45 is what number? I don't know. I wish I could do that math. But basically, it's probably like 36 or something like that. I say, okay, so we need 36 hours a week because people only work 45 weeks a year. No matter how you slice it, they work 45 weeks a year. You got weekends, you got holidays, you've got 2, 3, 4 weeks of vacation, like you got sick time, you got kids are sick, you got whatever, So 45 weeks is a pretty conservative estimate. If somebody's going to bill 36 hours, They've got to be, and they're doing it in small increments. Like they're not a litigator who's going to get 8 or 10 or 12 hours in a day for going to trial. 36 hours takes 55 hours for a relatively efficient person to work, right? So when we think about comp, we need to think about expectations. We also need to make sure that we're focused on what we value. Just have to make our third session more focused on compensation, but I want to just leave people with this kind of this thought. Going back to the initial topic we talked about around benchmarking, that profits per partner is one of the measures, one of the benchmarks that people are interested in. People are also interested in percentage of profitability, and percentage of profitability sometimes includes what our equity partners get paid and sometimes doesn't. So I want to challenge everybody here to think about this. You are an equity partner in a law firm. Your compensation is in 2, maybe 3 buckets. Compensation is in 2 or maybe 3 buckets. The first bucket should be the market rate for you being a lawyer. Like if you didn't have to pay for this lawyer work. The second bucket is how much money are you going to make because you are a business owner and you ran a profitable law firm. And the third bucket of money, if it exists for you, might be something like you're the managing partner and you get $100,000 a year for doing that job. Like there might be a stipend for being on the executive committee, or maybe you're going to get a stipend because you're the president of the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers this year. It's going to take some time, something like that.
Yeah.
But if we start to think about, I'm a lawyer and I make $1 million a year. No, you don't. You're a lawyer and you make $300,000 a year to be a lawyer because you're running a profitable business. It makes us think about profitability differently. It makes us think about how we measure client profitability, matter profitability, practice area profitability, not just total revenue minus total expenses. We need to be digging further into our compensation analysis and our compensation plans and thinking about what does it look like in the future, because it doesn't look like the one that was created in 1996 that's clearly defined in a 14-page like it doesn't look like that, right?
Yep, it's not that.
Two ways to think about this.
No, I very much appreciate that, and it kind of dovetails into the question that we got in the chat. As we're thinking about this differently, and as we're trying to evolve our thinking, what are a couple of books you would recommend for folks to get started with when they think about benchmarking?
Okay, so one book that I'll give you that I just finished, which is excellent. And don't worry if you look at something and you're like, oh, that's for a small business. If you think about it, if you're a lawyer who's building a business, you're kind of your own small business inside of your big business. So the first one that I would say, sorry, I'm trying to, because I don't want to get the name wrong and I don't like to not give people the author name. So give me 1 second. It's called Simple Numbers, Straight Talk by Greg Crabtree.
Writing this down.
Simple Numbers, Straight Talk. It's actually called Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits by Greg Crabtree. That is an excellent book. Also, if you haven't read The E-Myth, the classic Michael Gerber E-Myth book is excellent, but there's the E-Myth for lawyers. It's, probably a little bit more relatable, same concept. If you have not read that, I would encourage you to read The E-Myth. Do you have anything you want to?
Yeah, I would say I would re-emphasize radical candor, which I think in terms of change management is really important. I can't tell you how many times I've gone back and reread that book for different elements within that book. I live by it. So yes, radical candor, read that book. The other thing I would recommend you do is reach out to your local Association of Legal Administrators chapter. There is a wealth of information there. If you're not part of the ALA, reach out and just kind of explore what that would look like. But there are individuals within the ALA that specifically specialize in this, and they have a wealth of information and resources that are available to you if you're an administrator or a CFO or a COO or a director of IT. It may seem like it wouldn't make sense to join that group, but it does make a lot of sense. Here at Centerbase, we will do giveaways every once in a while for law firms for memberships to the ALA. So feel free to reach out to us if you're looking for a sponsorship. But there's a lot of institutional knowledge there that I would highly recommend you go to that specific area for more. We are right at the top of the hour. This concludes our second webinar on profitability. We've learned so much. We've learned about the attorney journey, which, is a great tagline, I know, from Debbie, but also, reward what you value. I think that's a really important takeaway that we can all immediately start contemplating and thinking about. Get your data organized, figure out where you want to store it, and look at it in some way. Either one of us are happy to help you with that. The next webinar is coming up on November 13th. We're talking about law firm innovation. If that's a topic that's interesting to you, we'd love to see you back here to continue the conversation. And thank you for spending your afternoon with us.
Thank you.